Okay, I think we are live now.
Hey, great.
I can bring over the frame phone.
I think I should put, hey everybody, I think I should put a Billions poster behind me just so that it doesn't look like white space.
Yeah,
Take advantage of
absolutely.
the incredible promotional opportunity, the inches of white behind me.
Great. Well, I'm going to go ahead and kick us off here. Brian, thanks for joining us today. And everyone, thanks for coming for the live chat with Brian Koppelman. I am Alex. I run the podcast Vertical at Product Hunt, and I'm excited to be moderating today. I'm just going to introduce Brian briefly before we jump into it. So Brian is a filmmaker, writer, and producer. He wrote for Ocean's 13 and is currently creating Billions, a TV show that is scheduled to air on Showtime in 2016. Brian has also been the host of Slate's podcast, The Moment, since early 2014. And Brian, thanks for joining us today, man.
Oh, hey man, it's my pleasure to be here. What fun. Great.
That's great. Okay, so I'm just going to jump right in here and pull in a question from the queue. So, hey Brian, thanks for doing this AMA. I'm wondering, what is the best thing you've come across in the last 30 days and why?
This is a great question. I love this question. It says what, podcast, article, a tea. I've definitely had some pu'er tea, but that's not the answer. Love and I think if I had to pick one thing that just blew my mind over the last month, there've definitely been a couple of movies that I've seen. I loved the movie Mississippi Grind, which Fleck and Bowden made. They're great filmmakers. They made, Half Nelson and Sugar. And I've read some really interesting books. I'm in the middle of one right now that'll be out soon. But I think the thing that blew my mind was an episode of the podcast Love and Radio called The Red Dot. Did you hear it? Happen to hear this one, Alex?
No, but I've heard people talking about it. I'm backlogged, but it's on my list to check out.
I was backlogged too, and so I got to it probably like a month late or a few weeks late. But it starts out as one thing, as the best Love and Radio episodes do. Man, when that show is on, I think it is really close to the top podcast. I think Mystery Show is probably the highest elevation of the form you've ever seen, but in terms of just consistently being incredible and transcending the medium. But Love and Radio at its best is mind-boggling. And this episode takes you into the heart of a sexual predator, and really works you over so that and I know they got a lot of angry letters, which were really misguided, because as you go through this thing, who the person is, what his character really is, does become quite clear and chilling. And I was biking up the West Side Highway in New York, listening to it. And, as you know, one of the best things with podcasts is when you just don't want to stop whatever you just want to keep listening. And I just sat on the bike outside my apartment until the thing was over. So I would have to give that the full recommend.
That's great. Yeah, I definitely want to check that out, and I'm excited to hear about it. What other podcasts are you a big fan of?
I love Reply All. I think that those guys are, PJ and Alex, are really top level storytellers. I'm really glad that Bloomberg is doing third season of Startup and that it's back to his own story. I think that's really great. And, WTF at its best is still something that I listen to a lot. I love Elvis Mitchell's The Treatment. I think he's the best interviewer. And
interesting.
I listen to tons, I listen to many podcasts. And I think, Mystery Show, I think is as good as it gets. She's only done 6 of them. I listened to each one the day that it came out. And, I had Starley on my podcast and love talking to her about how she does what she does, how seriously she approaches it, how, this combination she has of whimsy and heart and penetrating search for the truth in sort of like every level, I do think is really novelistic and sets it apart like a Russian novel and sets it apart from everything else.
Oh yeah, I agree. She is great. Yeah. Is there anything that that frustrates you right now about podcasts? I feel like, we all love podcasts. Podcasts are great, but is there anything that you wish you could fix or change, either from the standpoint of a listener or a creator?
I love this. I haven't thought about it in this way, right? I love the medium, I think, and I love being part of a burgeoning medium. And I love the intimacy of the experience of listening to and making podcasts. And I love the relationship that I have with the audience that listens to my show. There are so many things about it that I love. as a podcaster, booking guests is challenging because it's finite resource. And for me, my standards are so very specific because I only want people on my show who truly fascinate me. Either their work or the way they've lived their lives has to, I have to find it incredibly compelling. And there has to be some question that arises in me as I look at the work or the life. And so that limits the pool, and then the time to sort of access those people is hard. And also still the barriers to entry. Like I think the name podcasting still, if we use an elevated word, still blows because audio on demand would be better, but even that's confusing to people. It's like somehow people who don't get it have a hard time, even after Serial, really understanding what they are. And I wish someone figured out a better way to handle monetizing them, right? I'm really glad that I don't have to lose money, which the first year and a half I did lose money because I paid my own producer. But so advertising allows me, and the fact that I'm with Slate now allows me not to lose money doing it. But it would be great to not have to use an ad-supported model because I know how frustrating it is for the listeners. It's frustrating for me when I listen, but nobody's found it another way, I don't think. Oh, I left out Strangers before when I was talking about my favorite podcast. And Strangers is fucking awesome. I don't want to leave that out.
Great. Yeah, that's wonderful. And as a quick aside, I'd love to, after this, maybe put together a quick collection of episodes you love so we can share them out with the community. I bet people would really like that.
Great. Sure.
Yeah, 100%. As a quick follow-up to that, then, I was wondering, who is someone that you would love to work with, whether it's on a TV series or a movie or interview in a podcast that you haven't been able to yet? So,
I have had just this incredible run of luck in terms of the thing that I really do professionally, which is make movies and television shows. So I have gotten to work with almost every actor that I've wanted to, having written along with my partner, Dave, Ocean's 13. That just gets you a whole bunch of them. And, our first movie had Matt Damon and Edward Norton, John Malkovich, and John Turturro. So and right now I'm making, the show Billions that we're shooting. It's going to be on in January on Showtime. I have Paul Giamatti and Damian Lewis. And so I've been really blessed. I would love to work with Stanley Tucci. He's probably my favorite actor, or one that I haven't gotten the chance to work with, other than like a bunch of legends who, when I was a kid, really mattered to me. I've never made a movie with De Niro. That would be an incredible thing. And Tom Cruise, who I've had the pleasure to meet with a few times and have talked about stuff. I'm exactly in the right age where he's kind of like my movie star, my generation's movie star. So it would be a real thrill to get to work with Tom. But truly, getting to we made this little movie called Solitary Man that I wrote and my partner and I directed. And I got to, Michael Douglas starred in that film, and that would have been somebody, he would have been at the very, very top of any list I would have made. And so getting to do that was like realizing an incredible dream, and one that had seemed only a few years before really unlikely. So.
Yeah, that's great. Is there like a particular really interesting or funny story that you'd like to share from all of your experience making TV shows or movies?
I don't know. It's such a broad. It's too broad a question. And so much of that stuff is situational. Also, I can't tell stories about what happened on set. There's no way.
Right. Okay.
Because I want to be able to be on another set again.
Right. maybe in your memoirs or something.
Yeah, let's save it for that.
Great. I'm going to bring in another question from
the
folks here. Okay. It's hard to ask just one. What's a movie that never fails to make you laugh?
Oh, good. Adam Muller, who I think actually started asking me to come on and do this. So I'm glad Adam asked this question. And I think Stripes. If I had to name a movie that always makes me laugh, I would say Stripes. Bill Murray, Harold Ramis, and John Candy, in an all-time classic movie. Just hilarious. Kills me. Oh, he asked a second question too.
Oh, and big fan of The Moment. What's something that you used to strongly believe but no longer do?
Okay, that's a great one, because it's the whole reason that I started doing The Moment. And it's until I was 30, I didn't believe that I could get past writer's block. I was someone who always wanted to be a creative person and live my life based on imagination and ability to tell stories. And but I thought that was an impossible dream, and I was really thwarted. And somehow, around my 30th birthday, my first child was born, and I realized that if I wanted to be the kind of person who would come home and tell my kids that they could be anything they dreamed of, I had to be doing that. Otherwise, I'd be living a lie. And I realized that when you're blocked, if you allow yourself to give into it, it becomes, when that wish dies, it kind of becomes toxic. And that toxicity, like any toxicity, spreads. And that you are not the best version of yourself around the people that you love. And that was when I made the promise and commitment to myself to find a way to break through. And it was a binary difference. I started then figuring out how to write every day. And from the moment that I really finally broke through, within a year, we'd sold Rounders, and a couple months later, we were making the first movie. And so that's absolutely a belief that I was certain I'd never be able to do it. And then suddenly I found a way to get to the other side.
That's amazing. Do you have any insights that you'd like to share around how you were able to personally overcome the writer's block?
Sure. Yeah. A few things. And I talk about this stuff a lot on the podcast, and I talked about a lot in the 6 Second Screenwriting Vine series that I did. I think a big cornerstone was realizing that I was a perfectionist secretly. Like, I had some combination of ADHD and perfectionism, and those things together are terrible. And because the perfectionism gives you the excuse to go on to something else. And so two things happened. One, I read Tony Robbins' book, Awaken the Giant Within. And two, I read and did the exercises in the book, The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. And those things together, Tony's book, which allowed me to get the clarity on what I really wanted and that I needed to go after it. And then Julia's book, which gave me the actual practical technique to get yourself in a state of flow. And then since then, I've come up with a series of practices that, a routine that allows me to stay in a state of flow most of the time and to chase the things that I want. I do morning pages, which comes from her book. I do morning pages every single morning of my life. Rare exceptions, which is 3 freehand pages. And I meditate. I do transcendental meditation every day. And I take long walks. And together, those things seem to keep the inner critic's voice at bay.
That's great, man. That's wonderful. I'm going to pull in another question really quick. Let's see here. We have one from Emily. Who is your favorite actor that you've already worked with? And can you tell us any funny or surprising stories? Well, I guess we know.
I can't do that one, but I can. I mean, again, favorite actor is really tough because what happens when as I said, I've been lucky enough to make movies as a screenwriter and a director and producer. So I'm on set and I'm working very closely with these people. So they become really close collaborators and friends. Mm-hmm. And it would be kind of rude to talk about who a favorite person is. But I would say that, all the people, certainly you go back to your first movie and the fact that we got to work with Matt Damon, and I've worked with Matt a couple of times, and Edward Norton, who I made 2 movies with as well. And, it was right from the beginning, we were in a position where we developed real kinship and friendship with these actors. And I could point to people in every movie and tell you that about really wonderful times and moments with them. So, and I will say, Giamatti, who this is the second thing I've ever done, and Damian Lewis on this show. Paul, we made The Illusionist with Paul. This is like the best time I've ever had working on this show with these people. So
that's great. Is there anything that you'd like to share with us about Billions? I don't know how much you've publicly announced, but
sure. Yeah. So the show and the trailers are, I'm sure if you're watching Showtime at all, they're banging the trailer, which is great. And so the show starts January 17th at 10 p.m. on Showtime, and it'll be on for 12 Sundays in a row. I think the Super Bowl is probably not on, but I think they'll skip the week of the Super Bowl. And it was created by my partner, David Levine, and me, and Andrew Ross Sorkin. And Dave and I are the showrunners of the show. And it's Giamatti and Damian Lewis and Maggie Siff and Malin Ackerman are the stars of the show. And Damian plays a hedge fund billionaire, and Paul plays the United States Attorney for the Southern District. And it's a show that really examines these 2 kingdoms in our, and the sort of unfettered power that each of these people have and the way in which they're set on a collision course.
That's great.
And yeah, it's great. I mean, I can't wait for people to see it. And it's one of these things where I think the pilot's really terrific and people have reacted so well to it. But I also know that the show only gets better from the pilot. And so that's really exciting. As we've been putting these episodes together, I really feel the momentum and feel like by the time people get to the midpoint of the season, they'll really be really engaged and digging it. And I kind of can't wait for that conversation to start.
Yeah, that is really exciting. Was there a particular inspiration for the show?
I mean, there was so much. I mean, living in New York, you just see this wealth and power. And so have long been fascinated by it and got the opportunity to spend time around a bunch of different hedge fund people and research, be in their offices. And it was in the ether. And for a long time, we've been thinking about how to attack it. So yeah, I mean, tons of inspiration, little points of inspiration. And then as these things do, then the idea just sort of coalesced, you know?
That's great. We have a question here from Jake. Are there any essential apps you use to keep track of your different ideas and projects?
I'm such a Luddite. Yes, it's this is what I use. I just write on the notes. I just write in notes. That's it. Basically, to keep track of ideas, I just use the notes app. I mean, I know there are so many better ways to do it, but and I email stuff to myself. That seems to, obviously I use Dropbox and I use iCloud, but like I don't somehow, if I'm outlining, if I have ideas for a script, then I'll open a final draft document pretty early on in the process, and then I'll dump all the ideas into the final draft document. There are apps now you can read final draft. We can read, John August created, you can read final draft documents on the iPhone. So I think that's it, but I'm always open for it. Like, what app should I be using to keep track of that stuff?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually, I use like Notepad myself, so I'm not the best person to ask. Yeah, but I'm sure we have people where we have collections of really great apps that would be very useful in this situation. We can follow up with you on that. Let's see here. I'm a little bit curious about where did you grow up and sort of like what is your origin story and how did you get to be in the position that you're in now?
So I grew up about an hour out of New York City in Long Island, and I went to like a small Quaker school, and my father was in the music business, and I was always thinking that's what I was going to do my whole life. I figured I would be an executive, probably in that business, and I did do that. I've told some of this story on a bunch of different places, but to go quickly, when I went off to college, I became very involved in the anti-apartheid, pro-divestment movement, which was people were lobbying their colleges to divest their endowments from South Africa, essentially, because it was still apartheid. And in doing that, I came across, when I was organizing a big event for this, I came across the singer-songwriter Tracy Chapman. And I ended up working with her. I produced her demos and was the executive producer for her first album and signed her. And that was the album with Fast Car on it and talking about a revolution. And it, so that led me to have this whole music career where I was an A&R person. And then around, like I said, around when I was 30 and trying to figure out how to change, I stumbled into the poker club and really in an instant had this idea, oh, this is the movie that Dave and I should be writing, and called him. And then we just wrote the script in a basement, man. And it was one of those, David made some contacts and found an assistant who worked in an agency and sent the script out, and that began the whole thing. But it,
how long did it take to write it?
Short. We researched it for a long time, but then the writing itself, once we started writing, it was like 4.5 months. But we researched for a year and took notes. Part and parcel to like having a big dream and chasing it is then applying rigor. And so to me, that was a combination. It was like figuring out how to get through and then being determined enough to rigorously chase it down every single day. And then to be kind of rigorous and brutal about the work itself as you're going to keep making it better and stronger. And so those were the things that I realized to do around that time.
That's great. I have a kind of a long question here from Charlie, but I think it's an interesting one. So I'm going to go ahead and read it. Right. Thanks for doing this. Huge fan of the moment. You have some great content riffs with Tim Ferriss about startups and film. Could you ever see the intersection of film and entrepreneurship? like a Y Combinator or incubator that supports super talented writers and filmmakers for a year and starts them on the right path, like the Judd Apatow schooling of Rogan, Franco, Kasdan, etc. Familiar with the Nichols Fellowship. Oops, I lost my screen. There we go.
I have
Okay.
it. I see the question.
Okay. Cool.
Well, I mean, as you just said, Charlie, it happens informally now, right? The reason for the incubators is because there's this money source that comes in and maybe gets aggregated, and then there are all these different ideas that surface, and I guess it's a way to. My son is a sophomore at Harvard, and he's got a startup, so I know a lot about all this now. But I don't think that it needs to be formalized as an incubator in that way. I mean, collections of artists have done this. United Artists started that way. Collections of artists getting together happens all the time, but and then supporting other artists. But I think it happens informally now, and I'm not sure how the economics would work to make it sort of formalized.
Great. We have a question from Leila. It says, you've been a contributor to Grantland for a while, which recently closed shop. Do you have any thoughts on ESPN's decision to do that?
I do. I had left Grantland 6 months before it shuttered to go to Slate with the podcast, but I remained a dedicated, loyal consumer of Grantland. I think that was an incredible collection of writers, and I'm so bummed that I'm just deeply, deeply bummed that Grantland's not there. I think it was an incredibly valuable resource. Yeah, it's really sad. It's really sad that ESPN, I made a documentary, a 30 for 30 documentary with Dave for ESPN. I really have friends there and I love you, but I'm wounded that Grantland's not there. I miss it every fucking day.
Totally. Just looking here to try to grab another question really quick.
I see what I like. Someone just asked me, what's the experience like of being a boss for writers? Because it's a fun, which, when you're a showrunner, I guess you have a writing staff. It's an interesting question because I don't think of myself, we don't think of ourselves as like being a boss of writers. Yeah, I think the moment you start thinking of yourself that way, you're doomed, because you have to think of yourself as like a partner with these people and a co-conspirator, and you hope to inspire by like doing your work as hard as you can, and then maybe that'll help them to do it. And I want to learn from them as much. I think you don't want to have I don't want to have a strictly, crazily hierarchical organizational structure for an endeavor as purely creative as this one.
Great. I know that you're just now beginning to prepare for the debut of Billion, so it might be premature for the question I'm about to ask, but what type of project do you envision yourself working on next? And maybe what is something you've sort of always dreamed on working that you've never been able to or haven't gotten around to yet?
Yeah, I didn't answer the second part of your question before, which was about, I realized about people I'd want to work with, because I talked all about the actors, but for the podcast, I just have to say, in case either of them are out there and listening, my 100th episode of The Moment is coming up, and Michael Stipe and Haruki Murakami would really be a dream for me for the 100th episode. In terms of like dreams, dream projects, so when you're running a show, a TV series, it really does blot everything else out. I mean, there's just, first of all, I've gotten to do so many things that I want to do. There are always individual movies or shows, ideas like that. My hobby that's like away from all this stuff is I love writing country songs. And I would, if I could get a cut on an album or go write with, Chris Stapleton or something, that'd be incredible. But that's sort of like I file that under just crazy sort of wish fulfillment things. But I mean, the great thing about the way that I've tried to set up my life and my wife, Amy, and our kids is that when an idea surfaces, we go and chase it. My wife's a novelist. Her third book, Hesitation Wounds, came out this week. And her last book, I Smile Back, she wrote the screenplay, and that movie came out a couple weeks ago starring Sarah Silverman. And all these things in our house, if somebody has an idea or a dream, we all try to figure out how to help that person put it into motion. And so with this show, like what I hope happens is the show goes on and everyone wants a second season really badly and we can get to work on it right away. So that's really what I'm thinking about in the near term. And
Absolutely.
continuing the podcast, which I love to do.
Yeah, well, speaking about the podcast and, you're coming up on your 100th episode, which is really exciting. What have you learned about perfecting and making podcasts since you started? And maybe like, what were some of the habits or practices that you used to do and no longer do? Or maybe what are some of the things you do now that you didn't used to?
Well, mine is a pure interview show. And so, so much of it has to do with the chemistry that happens between me and my guest. In the beginning, I think I know I wrote out these introductions and it gave it a certain kind of structure, but it also started it in a very formal manner. And I stopped doing that about a month and a half in. And that was a big difference because it just made the thing conversational from the start. And then I learned a lesson somewhere in the first 30 or 40, I had one guest on that I didn't really care about. And I did it as a favor to somebody. And I've learned that's a disaster. I have to sit there and the world has to drop away when I'm having this conversation. Right? If you're going to care about it, I have to care about it a ton. And if I don't, or if I'm distracted or if I'm thinking about anything else, it won't work. And so that's the main thing. Like I have to be really, really, I have to say no all the time. And I have to really know that I have something to talk about with the guest.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that actually reminds me, I was listening to a podcast recently. It's the Axe Files with David Axelrod. He had Obama's. Yeah, I like it too a lot. He had Obama's former speechwriter on there. And actually one of the biggest pieces of advice that they had about speechwriting, oddly enough, was making it conversational, which is perhaps counterintuitive.
That makes sense. I love what fascinates me as a real, I'm a Democrat and an atheist and really far away from what I'm about to say, but Mitt Romney was great on Axelrod's show. And I really found it fascinating to hear the two of them, now that Mitt is kind of post-politics for the time being, talking. I was like, I felt like Axelrod did a great job of giving me a window into, somebody I thought I would have no interest in listening to for an hour, and I really was interested. Right. That's one of the great things about podcasts.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I totally agree. Let's try to pull another one here. Okay, we have one from Mike. Hey, Brian, so awesome that you're here on Product Hunt. I love your 6-second screenwriting tips. What inspired you to start creating them? And do you have any more plans for that content beyond Vine?
So I started doing the 6-second screenwriting lessons out of anger in a way, and it wasn't supposed to be something that was gonna, they have like 55 million loops now. And, but when I started it, I had like 6 Vine followers or something. And I just hadn't even made a Vine yet. And I just spoke into my phone and said, all screenwriting books are bullshit, all of them. Watch movies, read screenplays, let them be your guide. And it was out of anger because I realized I would do Twitter Q&As sometimes, and the questions that would come in all had, most of them had underlying premises that were faulty. And I was like, where does this underlying premise come from? That an inciting incident has to happen here, or that the structure has to be like this, or, oh, you have to be in a certain genre. And I realized it was from these bogus books and seminars. And so kind of out of anger, I just said that thing, sent it out, tweeted it, and called it 6-second screenwriting lessons #1. And it just immediately was one of those things, like it immediately blew up, and all sorts of actors started retweeting. And I did like 6 of them that day, and made a promise to myself that as long as I had something that I believed to be true, that I found to be useful to say, I would do one a day. And so I did one for like 340 days. And every day I did one of them. And I watched this thing grow and grow and grow. But then I saw how much people wanted just a non-bullshit hack into creativity every day. And then when I got to around 340, I saw that I was going to start pushing. I was going to be doing it for other reasons. And, it's very hard. It's my concern about Periscope, for instance, which is it's very hard to keep these things where you're really doing the thing for its utility for other people, not for yourself. And I find one of the things that keeps me able to do the thing that I do is to try to take as much ego out of it. Look, we all want gratification and ego satisfaction, but the more that I can keep the focus on like what's the utility for other people, the better. So like Periscope, I was doing for a short time, and I found the endorphin hit to be too great. The dopamine just of going on 1,000 people being there, it made me uncomfortable somehow. And I could see with the Vines, like I say, I have over 50 million views on the Vines. It also, I got to a point where I felt like I'd said the stuff I had to say. So once in a while, something will come into my head and I'll know that it's useful and I'll go say it, but I rarely do it. It's possible I'll collect them in a book at some point because I get letters every day about them. So I could do something with the content in the future if I find exactly the right vehicle for it.
Totally. Let's see here. Trying to pull some more in from the site. Okay, we have a question here from Kate. Who are some of the people that have had the greatest impact on you?
Awesome. My dad, for sure, who has been, I guess people either have a dad that they love and want to emulate or a dad that they don't. And I don't think there's a lot of middle ground. And for me, my father has always put his family first. He was a really successful bootstrap guy, but like came home to every ball game I ever had. And I have to say, like, family is for me the key thing. Like I'm one of these people who got lucky and I married the right person at a young age. And so watching my dad's example in that way, which was, if I was playing a basketball game and even if I was coming off the bench, he would be there. Even if that meant he had to go back to New York City to go to the meeting that night, he would come home for the game. And he let me from a very young age sit in on like business meetings that we would have and go to recording studios with him. And as I say, he was in the music business. And so I was treated like an adult from a very young age. And so my father was certainly a huge influence. My partner, the person I make movies and television shows with, David Levine, we met when we were 14 or I was 15, Dave was 14. And he's been an incredible influence for his work ethic and discipline and creative spirit. And my wife, Amy, who made me able to do this stuff. And then, Bob Dylan and Michael Stipe and Murakami and so many artists. I could spend the rest of this time just listing the artists who inspired me.
Great. Let's see here. I know you mentioned some of your favorite movies. I'm curious, what are some of your favorite TV shows?
So my two favorite TV shows of all time, and it's above everything else by a lot, and I constantly wrestle with which one I like better, are The Sopranos and Mad Men. Both shows, I think, depict character. If those shows were still on, I'd watch them every day. So, I mean, those two shows. And then, I love David Milch, so Deadwood and NYPD Blue are, I think, also some of the greatest shows of all time. I love The Wire. The Wire, I have incredible admiration for it. For me, it's not, I don't love it the way that I love The Sopranos and I love Mad Men, though I acknowledge that it's right up there with those other two shows.
Yeah, absolutely. And sort of along those lines, do you have a show that you think is maybe like one of the most underrated shows on television right now or recently?
On television right now? Well, like in the last year, I haven't watched a lot of series television because I'm making my show, but I really like Project Greenlight this year, even though it's sort of absurd. I really had fun watching it. And I'm loving watching the Notre Dame show on Showtime, which is like this half hour week to week of what's going on with the Notre Dame football team. But I'm not watching an underrated series right now. I think Mr. Robot's really good, but that's not underrated.
Cool. It looks like we have another question from Adam here. You mentioned having ADHD. I have ADHD, and my wife and I created an ADHD coaching business. How did you find out that you had ADHD? What was that experience like? And how does that influence your creative endeavors?
I don't know how it influences my creative endeavors now. I can tell you that it gave me an incredible sense of failure for many years, scholastically. If you have had real ADHD, And I agree with everyone who, I've read all the stuff, and I agree that it's overdiagnosed, and that Adderall and Ritalin are probably overprescribed. But if you really have had it, and you understand the feeling of certain textbooks being almost radioactive, so that you can't open them even if you want to, like the true thing of what it feels like to not be able to do the work. It's debilitating, especially if you're somebody who has a big intellectual toolkit otherwise. And so if you're someone who loves, let's say, like I was a kid who loved to read, anything that I was interested in, I could read quickly and have incredible retention, and I had a big vocabulary. But I could fail a history test in 2 minutes if the teacher was boring and the textbook was poorly written. I couldn't read it. I couldn't find a way to do it. And so it creates incredible cognitive dissonance. And it took me years to figure it out. I found ways to cope. And so I went to a good college, and I went to law school at night, and I was successful at a young age. But I still felt deep inside like I was lazy and a failure. And people who know me now think I'm like one of the hardest workers. Like the thought of me being lazy is absurd. But I felt really lazy, and couldn't win. And so it was one of the huge things that I had to battle. And one of the things that until I was in my really around the time I decided to do this, to believe, people in talent, to really understand and accept, oh, I have this thing. And I took Adderall. I've taken Adderall at times. I've been taking it, for a year at a time. I'm not taking it. I don't take it now. But as soon as I took it, it was like, a giant shift. And I realized, I actually have I actually have something chemically going on that can be fixed short-term by medicine. And then if I can somehow take the lessons from that, I can maybe deal with it afterwards without medicine. So it's had a giant impact on it had a giant impact on my life when I was young. For years, I used to say that, I used to think that if I'd been able to have medicine when I was a young person, I would have just gone and been something. I'd been like a conventional person. I probably wouldn't have ended up being an artist. You know what I mean? Because I would have just succeeded in a different way in school.
Yeah, absolutely. I like sort of the reflective nature of where that was sort of headed. I was wondering if you could give your 20-year-old self any advice, what would it be?
Well, the general 20-year-old or me? Me at 20?
Oh, you. Yeah, you. Well, we could do both.
I mean, me, it's better. Worry less. Honestly, worry less and like love more. As like absurd as that sounds, that's just true. Because you get nothing done by worrying. And I probably would have slipped myself a little bit of Adderall. Maybe a few Adderalls would have been useful. By the way, Great Hold Steady song, ask her for some Adderall. I should just
throw
that down, but yeah.
Yeah. Let's see here.
Hey, Adam, I want to tweet at me later and tell me if any of that made sense to you. I'm interested in what you and your wife do with the ADHD coaching.
Let's see here. What was your most, I don't think this one's been asked yet. What was your most memorable experience interviewing someone on The Moment, and why?
I have to give a couple of answers to that. Well,
yeah, go for it. Yeah, don't limit yourself.
My wife was on a couple of weeks ago, Amy Koppelman, and the reaction to that episode shocked me. People were just blown away by it and by Amy's the fact that they were incredibly touched by her openness and the sort of truth and beauty in what she had to say didn't surprise me. But the sort of the wide range of people who reached out to tell me how moved they were did surprise me, because she talked about depression and overcoming various hardships. And so that was really heartening, and it was hard to do. And then it was hard to do that and to have to put myself in a position of being truly an objective partner and doing this podcast with the person I know best in the world. And then a couple of weeks ago, I mean, there've been so many, I can't tell you how much I love doing the show, but So Tony Robbins or Seth Godin or my buddy Tim Ferriss, those are guys who I admire. Seth Godin is a giant. It was an influence, has become a close friend, and that's been was great. But Salman Rushdie was on a few weeks ago,
Mm-hmm.
and you really have to prepare if you're going to do that. If you're going to have like one of the smartest people in the world and best writers in the world on your show, you can't be phoning it in at all. And so I really had to, and I'm making the TV show, so I didn't really have as much time as I would have liked. Now, luckily, I'd read some of his books before, and I thought about it a lot, and I knew him. But having gotten through that interview, you can hear me. I can hear that I'm nervous in the first 7 minutes, but then it just becomes this really great conversation, and really struck a chord in people too. In fact, Tim Ferriss sent it out in his bullet list on Friday as like the best podcast he'd heard lately, and I was thrilled about that. And the reaction to that has been great, because Salman, people don't understand that because he's so famous and so sort of highly regarded in literary circles, people don't know how just kind of funny and everyday smart he is also. And his diagnosis of the world and its issues and the cures for that are presented on the show in just a really understandable and fascinating way. And so I loved getting to do that. And then there were other things. I had Amy Mann, the songwriter, on, and I knew her in my record business days, and I got to get stuff out that I'd always wanted to. So that was great. And having Mark Maron on early was really fun too.
Yeah, that's great. I really enjoyed the Salman interview.
Oh, thanks.
Okay, we have another question over here. I think this one's more along the writing process guidelines. Hi, Brian. What have you found to be the best process of writing a compelling story, and what are your main components?
So I have to really want to tell it. If I try to sort of do it from outside in, it won't work. Like if somebody gave me a log line, I could create a professional script or short story out of sort of like the log line. But the most important thing to me is that I'm going to want to show up every day and tell the story, because it's a long slog to write a screenplay. So I have to find something I can connect to in it. And then it's just, you just got to do it. Nobody can really, there's at the end of Siddhartha, there's the Buddha's kiss, right, on the forehead, which is instead of outside in wisdom, you have to just take it in. And writing is the kind of thing you can only learn to do by doing. It can be taught. It certainly wasn't to me. And I always think it's bogus. So, look, if you know how to, Thea Harris, I think that's how you say your name. If you know how to tell a story to your friends, that's a great exercise, I think. Say it out loud, record yourself telling it, figure out why it works, and then write it down and see what it looks like. That's just a technique I would use. But again, that comes from the inside. What's a story you can tell at dinner that works? Say it out loud into your phone. If it can't do it alone, do it telling it to somebody you don't know so they hear it for the first time. Listen back, write it down, and look at what the structure was, and maybe model on that.
I'm curious, would your advice to newer writers be to also get lots of feedback from other people they trust? I know that's sort of something that resonates in the tech startup world. I wonder if that has parallels over if everyone's maybe path or process is different.
There's a time to get feedback for sure, and it's really valuable. You have to know when you're strong enough to take that feedback, because the kind of feedback you want is stern and accurate and sometimes withering feedback. And so probably the day you finish something isn't when you want it, because you'll be crushed by it or you'll react angrily. So you want that feedback when you are emotionally ready, but yes, you need it at a certain time, when you're finished probably.
Mm-hmm. I thought that was an interesting point of that Salman was talking about too in the interview with you. We have a question here from Corley. What is the biggest misperception regarding the entertainment industry?
That like long-term, it can be gamed somehow. I think Seth Godin has a lot of stuff right when he talks about, just go out there and make a ruckus and to create your thing. I don't think the barriers to entry are impossible. They're hard and high, but they are not impossible. And it ultimately over time comes down to doing the work. The biggest misperception in a word is like thinking you need an agent. That's just not true, especially not now. All you need to do now is put your work online, build a community of people who care about it, and then you flip the paradigm. This so-called business will come to you.
Is there a particular story that comes to mind that helps illuminate that perspective?
Well, sure. I mean, the selling of our first screenplay, which was, again, I've told this on Tim Ferriss's podcast, so I'll tell it quickly, but our first screenplay was rejected by every agency, not half the agencies, all the agencies rejected it. I had the letters for a long time, but I certainly remember what everybody said. They were notes from a guy we knew who'd sent it out. They all rejected it. And then when we sold it to Miramax, because someone Dave knew a producer and when we sold it to Miramax, all the same agents that passed on us, every single one of them tried to sign us. And I would read them the comments that they said when they passed. And they would be like, oh, I didn't say that. It was my assistant or some reader. And right away I realized, oh, it's all fucking bullshit. So they don't fucking know, just that.
Great. And I think pretty soon we can start bringing in a few callers as we wrap this up.
Go ahead. That's great.
Awesome. If anyone wants to jump in and ask Brian a question, hit the call in button and we can bring you in. I know, Adam, you've been trying to hop in too. We'll see if anybody jumps in. I think I'm doing this right. This is okay, here we go. Here's Adam.
Yeah. He's trying, almost. Hey.
There he is.
How's it going, man?
Well, thanks for doing this, man. This is so great.
Sure. Thanks for starting it off. Thanks for having the idea.
Absolutely. Question, you talk about, your writing partner. And I'm so curious how, if kind of writing, what's his name is David?
David Levine, yeah.
David Levine. So having him, how does that influence, so-called writer's block, or is the morning pages kind of routine that you have kind of take care of the writer's block?
Well, yeah, I think in the beginning, great, man. I think in the beginning, having, as you know, because you study ADD, being on teams helps. So in the beginning,
Right.
that absolutely helped in that way, because I had to be able to produce results. We were doing it together, and that helped a lot and helps a lot. For Dave's example, though, the fact that I saw him getting up every day and doing the work really helped. The morning pages is the thing that really changed it. Like Solitary Man, the movie that Dave and I directed, I wrote myself. And that was a really big deal for somebody who has had my journey, because I wrote I had to write the whole script and focus on it and do it all by myself and prove to myself that I could. And that wouldn't have happened if it weren't for both the example from Dave and watching him do it, but and then also doing the morning pages and knowing that if I just did a little bit a day, I could get the thing done, the consistency, right, of effort, that I could get it done.
Got you. And I'm so curious if that's all right. When I heard the interview with David, you guys sound your intonation's like really similar.
Yeah.
It was really hilarious. And I was like, wow, this is really funny. But I was wondering, does he have kind of those ADHD tendencies as well? If so, that's awesome.
No, he has none.
If not, he doesn't.
No.
Damn it. All right.
But we do talk a lot the same, because we've been best friends since we were kids.
Got you. That was evident. I appreciate it, Brian.
All right, Adam, take care. Bye.
Okay, thanks, Adam. And we can, while we wait for somebody else to see if they want to hop in, I'm curious, you've mentioned the morning pages a lot. Do you want to elaborate for folks who maybe aren't familiar with exactly what that entails and why it's helpful?
Sure. So Julia Cameron wrote this book called The Artist's Way that I mentioned earlier. And it's a book that has a series of exercises designed over, I think, 12 weeks to free you of any creative block that you have. And that could be like a creative block at work. And a lot of the book is spiritual, and I'm, as I said, an atheist, and so the spiritual side of it doesn't interest me. But she came up with a technique called morning pages, which is 3 written longhand pages every day. So you can't type it. You wake up and it's supposed to be the first or second thing you do in the morning. I meditate too, so some days I do morning pages first, and some days I meditate first. But you cannot censor yourself. And you don't read the pages back for at least 5 years. All you're doing is running your hand across the page, every line by line for 3 pages, and you don't stop. And what happens as you start to do that every day is you just unlock, I think, the part of yourself that's the most creative. You start talking to yourself in ways you don't anticipate, but what ends up happening is you become freed of whatever the bullshit is that's stopping you. And I would say this, I've said this before on my show, I've given the book to probably 100 people. Of those 100 people, let's say 11 of them have actually done the thing, like opened it and read and done the exercises. Of those 11, 7 of them have finished novels or written screenplays that got produced or made. So the percentage of people who do the morning pages to achieve great results is very high.
That's great. While we're waiting for somebody else to call in, I'm also curious, when did you start meditating? And for anybody who maybe doesn't meditate or fully understand perhaps what the value would be, how would you explain why it is so important for you?
So Tim Ferriss says that when he interviews people on his podcast that he said some incredibly high number, like 80% of the high achieving people he interviews have a regular meditation practice.
Wow.
And it's about stilling the mind. And whether you think it's just because of the breathing so I do transcendental meditation, and it's 20 minutes twice a day. I sometimes miss the second one, but I never miss the first one. And it's 20 minutes of, repeating a silent mantra. And what ends up happening is your anxiety just disappears. So, that's a big deal for me. It seems like someone has a question.
Yep, we're trying to see if it'll connect here.
So yeah, just go on. Meditation for me changed. I would say if the morning pages freed me and enabled me to start doing this work, I still would sometimes get really bad anxiety. And from when I started meditating, anxiety dissipated almost 100%. And just it's chemical, it's cortisol. It's about sort of restarting and resetting your cortisol levels. It just works.
That's fascinating. It looks like Queen Pat is not really able to connect, so I'm going to close it. Maybe she can try again. We'll see if we can get somebody in here. In the meantime, I have kind of a lighter question. Is there anything on your bucket list in life that you hope to do maybe in the next 5 years that you haven't done yet?
Wow, I don't know. I don't think I have a bucket list like that, because I think I basically go and try. I think I no longer have a chance to be the starting point guard for the Knicks. So no, I mean, look, when you get to do the thing that I do, I have a book deal and I'd like to write the book, I think, but no, there's nothing like bucket list like that. I'm accepting ideas for that.
Yeah. Well, it looks like we don't have anyone calling in. Oh, here we go, Charlie. If it will connect. Hey, Charlie.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
Hey, man, how are you?
I'm good. Hey, Brian, first off, thanks for doing this. And Porzingis looks great, so you should be encouraged for sure.
Yeah. Well, I boycotted the Knicks for a year because I think Dolan is such a bad owner. But Porzingis he brought me back, man. I watched a game the other night for the first time in a long while.
Yeah, Phil Jackson looked like he did his first thing right, at least.
He really did it right. He did that.
Yeah.
There's no question about it. That kid can really play. The Knicks' luck being what it is he going to make it through the season? I don't know.
Yeah.
My son was like, "Is this Channing Frye?" But we'll see.
Yeah. No, I'm a Pacers fan, but it's exciting to see the Knicks because when the coasts are good, NBA wise, the NBA is good.
You're right.
My question is about showrunning versus making a movie. You had a great podcast with Bo from House of Cards. And so I was wondering how, because that's now billions of post House of Cards when that interview went through, how does it change between filmmaking and then being a showrunner? And how have you, do you like one or the other so far?
I mean, showrunning is the closest thing to movie directing in a way, because you're really doing all of it, right? It's all part of telling. The storytelling thing it's all connected, and I think it's very similar. What's great about this is you have 12 hours to tell this story, and maybe 24 hours or 36 hours, depending on how much people like it. And so being able to use everything you use as a film director with this, this bigger, longer palette is just incredible. But I get to work intimately with the actors and with the editors and the composer and all in all the same ways one would as a director. The added huge bonus of this is I get to work with some of my favorite directors. So like right now, the people who directed Mississippi Grind, Fleck and Bowden, are directing an episode for us. And that's amazing to me. We're out there last night on set. A couple things. One, I can hang with them, watch them do what they do, talk about the scenes, see the actors. And then when everyone goes in for coverage, I can leave and they can stand out in the cold shooting. So that's nice. And then, but really the opportunity to work with people like Fleck and Bowden, Karan Kusama, John Dahl, Jamie Foley, Neil LaBute, Neil Berger, like work with these amazing directors and really collaborate with them, make show running just fantastic.
For sure. And Ben Mendelsohn plays the loser to a T in that movie. So no, they're
so good in that movie. And
so good.
You like him despite the fact that he's that person.
Yeah, it's hard. Gambling movies are hard in general. But
I agree.
No, that's interesting. But I guess maybe the question I was really asking is on Netflix. I know that they get Final Cut in a lot of ways. Just Showtime. Do you guys get?
David Fincher had Final Cut on.
Okay,
on
so
that.
it's not just.
That's what, because Fincher was Bo's partner. I think that's how they had control. It's funny. So that's a really interesting distinction and worth talking about when someone asked about misconceptions. So I've had a few directors that I know who have Final Cut who have said, you never use Final Cut. If you have to use it, you've kind of lost. So the great thing about this and Showtime is once they decide after seeing your pilot that they're going to make your series, your interests are really aligned. They're making the same show you're making because they just want it to be great as you want it to be great. They've bought in on the tone, feeling, and mood of your show. So I don't view the notes process as in any way adversarial. I've been on movies where it's been really adversarial, but this process is a delight. They're smart people and they're helpful. So we've never it never gets to that place. I've almost never seen it, maybe once in my whole career, where someone's been like, but I have Final Cut, so most of the time, it's creative people trying to solve problems. And yes, you could be a dick or they could be an asshole, but honestly, that is the rare, like if you talk to people who do this, that is the rare exception. And most of the time, it's like, what's the best idea? Oh, that's a fucking great idea. Let's try to do that. Or like, oh, that's a really terrible idea. Okay, how am I going to get this person? And maybe that's annoying, and maybe you have anxiety. Like, well, what if they try to use Final Cut or take it? It just almost never happens. So, like in this, I mean, we have 3 editing rooms going, and I are there with the editors. We show our cuts to Showtime. And we have like delight, really like fun phone. Now, they like the show. Maybe if they hated it, it would be different. But right now, it's like it's great. That part is great.
No, it's awesome. Brings me to
scared, Charlie. Is it going to change?
No, it's
so far it seems great.
It's a good thing. I mean,
someone whispered.
No, I was reading Creativity Inc. by the former president of Pixar, and he speaks to that point all the time. The brain trust, they call it, with Pete Docter and all that stuff, where they would get in a room and hash and riff, and then that's how they came up with the best ideas. So
everybody I know who has worked there says I've never had the opportunity, but everyone I know just loves the experience. Oh, hey, Alex, I got to circle back because the other best thing, but I saw it a while ago, but it's just out, is Spotlight, Tom McCarthy's movie. That's an incredible movie that everybody should see. That movie should win the Academy Award this year.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Take care.
Thank you. We have time to take in one more person if they want to hop in. Just as we're about to wrap things up here. If anybody else wants to. Here we go. Adam again.
Sure.
That's fine.
So Brian, I'm so curious. You talk about being an atheist, and you're comfortable talking about that in the show, which I really like, and especially when you had the
John Acuff, probably
him, but who he worked for. What was that?
Dave Ramsey.
I should know his name. Wow.
Dave Ramsey,
yes, Dave Ramsey. That was like amazing episode. But I'm so interested because in the creative process, you kind of, you know, the magic of that being an artist.
Oh,
right?
dude, I
Kind of that
believe in, like,
experience.
I believe in love and art and
Yeah, right.
all that stuff. I just don't believe in a deity. And
No. So I have a question. So not, it's, I'm wondering like what, okay, so being an atheist, but experiencing that magic, how does that take place
Yes.
within you? Like, what do you call that? What do you think? I don't know. What is the magic that's happening? Or I'm not saying that's God, but I'm so curious in your words.
me too. I'm curious also.
That's we should stop right there. That's like the best answer in the world, maybe.
So yeah, I mean, it's you know, it's look, we have this collection of experiences, right? And then we're the prism through which we filter and see these things,
Right.
and or the filter and the prism. And so, what is the thing that makes certain people need to express this stuff in a certain kind of creative way? I don't know. I know that stories we tell each other help. They definitely serve some sort of Darwinian function, but beyond that, I'm okay knowing there are things I don't understand, and that things can happen that I'm not in control of. I feel like religion is a very destructive, can be a very destructive force, and so I don't believe that there's in a deity.
Yeah.
So look, I was raised Jewish in a Jewish home, but and I respect other people's religion and religious beliefs. But for me, I don't get anything out of thinking that there's some other place that this stuff comes from. I want to feel like if I open myself up to the best of myself and my collaborators, then a different kind of, we use the word magic. I know it's not really magic. It's chemistry that happens between creative people. And for me, those are the things I do believe in. I believe in love, and I believe in the goodness of humanity. I'm a moral humanist. And I think that that is what subs in for me for what other people use religious texts for.
Good. That's awesome, man.
Okay.
Thanks again, you guys.
Thanks, Adam.
Good question.
Appreciate it. All right. And I think with that, we're about done. This was really great. Brian. Thank you so much for coming on. This was a great chat.
Good, man. I enjoyed it, and hope to see everybody soon. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.